October 14th. So quiz 8 is going to be due after next week. Yeah, I mean, it says here in my notes, grades might be late. I think they are late now. So yeah, sorry, those are just going to come out when they come out. As soon as you receive your grades, no sooner, you can inbox me if you want to see your midterm. Please don't message me asking me if you can see your midterm, because I don't know when I can start scheduling them, because I have to wait till you guys get your grades. So once you see your grade on Canvas, then you can message me asking to see your midterm. And then what's going to happen is I'll post an announcement with specific instructions, so please read it just to like speed things up, because I get a lot of messages this time of year. Like just send me your name and student number, and then I will reply with I'll propose like a 15-minute slot for you, and then you can say yes or no. And then we'll go back and forth until we find something that works. That's the best way I could figure out to do it. I didn't want to like pay for scheduling software or anything like that. So that's pretty much it. All right, so today I'm going to walk you guys through the midterm. And if at any point you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. So after I go through the midterm, Dr. Gavin asked me to go through quickly sort of what the aggregate demand curve is and how we get from the aggregate expenditure to the aggregate demand curve, and why the aggregate demand curve is stable equilibrium. So let's start with question 1. Suppose that in 2019, Canada's automobile manufacturers produced 2 million cars priced at $20,000 each. In 2020, they produced 1 million cars priced at $40,000 each. Ceteris paribus, the change in nominal national income is what? All right, so the correct answer here is D. I'm going to walk through, maybe go through some of the wrong answers. Is anybody able to justify why it's D? Yeah?
Maybe on both sides.
Sorry, well, I might write stuff, so I'm actually gonna, would you guys rather it be on that side? Is that easier maybe, or? I just might need to write stuff, so that's why I'm on one screen right now. Can you see?
Yeah.
I can zoom in, yeah. Whoops. How's that? Is that a little better?
Yeah.
So, keyword ceteris paribus, what does that mean? It's Latin for what?
All else equal?
All else equal. So it's basically saying this is the only thing that's changed in GDP. So if it's the only thing that's changed, then we know that there's no change in nominal national income, right? Because $2 million times 2 million cars times $20,000 per car is the same as 1 million cars at $40,000 each, right? Same number, no change in nominal national income. All right, number 2. What is potential or full employment output? Anybody know this one?
Is it D?
It's D. Why is it D?
Because
Or let's talk about, so what's wrong with A? Does anybody know what's wrong with, can you tell me what's wrong with the answer A? Why is it incorrect?
actually achieved.
Yeah, the maximum GDP that an economy actually achieves throughout its entire history, right? Equilibrium is not, or potential GDP is not the same thing as maximum, right? Because we know that GDP can actually exceed the potential, right? And if you have your potential, like sometimes there's going to be a positive or negative output gap, right? So this line represents potential, and then sometimes we can be above or below. So if we were going by the maximum, we would think potential is here, which is not, right? So that's why A is incorrect. What about B? What's wrong with answer B? Anybody? Level of output achieved during periods when all of the labor force is employed. How much of the labor force is employed? What is unemployment at equilibrium income? What's the unemployment rate? Is it 0? Or is it not 0? What are the 3 types of unemployment? Who can tell me one?
Cyclical.
Sorry?
Cyclical.
Cyclical. What's another one? Sorry?
Fractional.
Frictional, I think. And what's your third one? Structural, right? Structural and cyclical, they come and go, but there's always going to be frictional unemployment, right? Like there's not really much you can do. Like people are going to, regardless of, you could live in a utopia and people probably are going to still want to switch jobs from time to time, right? That's going to take time. So that's why there's always going to be some positive level of frictional unemployment. So that means that when we're at equilibrium GDP, that doesn't mean we're at 0 unemployment, right? So what answer B suggests is that when we're at equilibrium, the unemployment is 0, right? Because it's saying the entire labor force is employed, which is not true, right? That would actually probably represent a scenario in which we're above potential, right? So the moral of the story is at equilibrium GDP, the unemployment rate is not 0. So that's why B is incorrect, right? What about C? I mean, that one's not super hard, right? C is pretty clearly wrong, right? The government can influence the equilibrium level of income, right? But it can't determine it, right? Because it can't change things like people's expectations, or it can't necessarily directly change their wealth in a meaningful way, right? Or other ceteris paribus variables, right? So D is the correct answer, we'll skip it. E, the GDP that could be produced if the economy's resources were fully employed at their maximum intensity of use. And again, I think the most confusing pair are D and E here. Probably most people picked either D or E. The key here is that we assume, like in our minds, the story we're telling ourselves when like GDP is above its potential is that we're like putting machines and like workers into overdrive, right? So it's like, theoretically, it's a capacity that they can work with, but we tell ourselves in this model it's like not sustainable, right? Like you can't pay your workers overtime forever. You can't like push machines to their limit, which will like maybe cause them to break down, things like that, right? So we assume that when we're employing resources at maximum intensity of use, that suggests we're above potential, right? So the correct answer is D, that it's the GDP that would be produced if the economy's resources were fully employed at a normal intensity of use. Are there any questions so far? All right. So number 3, suppose actual output is less than potential output. If the output gap measures the output loss due to the failure to achieve full employment, it can generally be concluded that the larger the output gap, what? Does anybody want to take a guess at this one? Anyone?
B,
B. Why is it B?
because like there's less productivity than the potential amount. Less people are getting hired.
Yeah, I would be careful with your wording with productivity, right? Because that means specifically Y divided by L, right? But I think I see what you're saying. It's basically, here the question is defining, if we have a positive output gap, that means we're below potential, right? So it's just setting that in question. And so it's saying if that output gap is larger, meaning we're farther below potential, then unemployment is going to be higher than its natural rate, right? So the answer here is B, because the greater that output gap, the greater the unemployment rate, right? As the further we go below, the further GDP goes down, period, right? It doesn't even matter if it's like relative to potential, right? If GDP is decreasing, it usually means we're employing less labor, right? So the answer is B. Number 4. Women entered the labor force in large numbers in the 20th century and increased the economy's GDP. This created what? Anybody?
C,
C, exactly. Why would it raise potential output?
because there's way more workers.
Yeah, exactly, right? We're increasing our stock of labor, and we assume that our potential output is a function of our stock of physical capital and our stock of labor, right? So if people enter the workforce, then our GDP should rise. That's another assumption we make about our production, right? We assume that the more workers we add to our production machine, the more it produces, always. So that's C, number 4. All right, suppose that a country's population is 30 million and it has a labor force of 15 million people. If 14.5 million people are employed, the country's unemployment rate is what? So this time, I'm just gonna do it on the board for you guys. Hopefully this one wasn't too hard, but it can sometimes get confusing what we mean by employment and unemployment. So let's think here. What is the unemployment rate? You can tell me what the unemployment rate is, yeah?
It's the number of unemployed people divided by the total labor force.
Yeah, it's the percentage of the labor force that doesn't have a job, right? It's not the percentage of the total population that has a job. So here we need to figure out how much of the labor force doesn't have a job, and we need to figure out how big the labor force is, right? So it's going to be without job divided by our labor force L, right? So in this case, how many people don't have a job? 14.5 million people are employed and our labor force is 15 million. So how many people don't have a job? 0.5 million, right? So the denominator is 0.5. And then our labor force is 15 million people. So the answer is going to be 3.33%. Which is B. All right, any questions on that one? Hopefully that's pretty clear. All right. The three main reasons, I mean, this one is basically just like, did you read the textbook? I personally don't like these questions, so there's not a lot for me to say about it, but basically this is just like, I think first 4 chapters of G-book, like he's kind of giving you guys some stylized facts about the Canadian economy over time, which is important to know. It's important to sort of contextualize what actually happens, but this kind of is just memorization. It is a little bit of theory though, which I will talk about. So the 3 main reasons that Canada's real GDP has increased steadily for many years are, anybody want to guess? Yeah.
A.
A. Let me see. That's a good guess.
B.
D. B. B. It sounds like we're not quite there. So the answer is D, but like there are a lot of answers that could sound plausible. So we'll go through each one of them and I'm gonna explain them. So like here, so the only issue with A is yes, you're right. Like we just had a question where it was like explicitly saying that women entering the workforce increases the stock of labor, which increases potential output. However, that's not really the reason why like real GDP steadily sort of increases over time, right? Like women entered the workforce en masse during a certain period where they earned that right, but like that's leveled off relative. You know what I mean? Like it's not like women aren't entering the workforce at the same rate now as they were in like World War II, right? Female labor force participation is relatively stable. Yeah.
I was more looking at the increasing levels of education part.
That's great, yeah, but yeah, unfortunately the whole answer's gotta be, it's the best answer, right? So it is, I agree though, it is like, I probably would have gotten this one wrong if I might have said A as well. It's a tricky one for sure. But steadily for many years, like I think this is just basically referencing the Canada's real GDP graph, and at the beginning of course we was talking about long-term GDP growth. So yeah, rising employment, yeah. Rising employment is one really, increasing levels of education of the labor force is also a good reason, right? Because that would mean higher productivity. But yeah, it's really just increase in participation rate of women in the labor force. It's not really a driving force in the modern day. B, an increasing stock of physical capital, increasing exports and rising employment. So what's the problem with B? Which one of those is sort of maybe not incorrect, like maybe not correct? Anybody?
I was thinking rising employment.
Rising employment rising employment sort of implies that like the labor force is getting larger, right? Or that we're putting more people to work. So that would cause GDP theoretically to increase, right? So I think that is a valid reason on B. Physical capital and rising employment are valid reasons. It's really exports, right? Like if we're exporting more, that doesn't necessarily mean like our real GDP. Like our real GDP doesn't depend on how much we're exporting. Does that make sense? It's really just like we're talking about like our potential GDP is, we basically, I think, I'm not sure if it's how we're gonna do it later on, but usually we basically say A, which is productivity, right? Times some function of capital and labor. And so basically, if it influences potential, it has to be either this, or this, right? So really we're looking for just rising employment, increasing stock of physical capital, and increasing productivity, right? It's kind of the 3 things there. Yeah.
What is stock of physical capital?
That's K, right? It's things like bulldozers, like plant equipment, right? Maybe later on we'll introduce like financial capital, right? So you can think of it as like investing in things you need to produce, like factory machines. Think of it like that. That's what physical capital means. Number C, the increase in life expectancy, the rise in employment, and increasing productivity. So again, rise in employment and increasing productivity do make sense, but it's the increase in life expectancy that doesn't really track, right? Like, think of it this way, right? I mean, does anybody have an idea? Why would an increase in life expectancy maybe not impact real GDP, yeah.
We're higher than it anyway.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like people retire around the same age, and so if they're living longer, if anything, that's gonna like reduce real GDP, right? Because people who are working fund the retirement of retirees, yeah.
But a lot of people can't afford to retire nowadays, like early enough, so increasing life expectancy.
That's true. However, like people still have to exit the work, like eventually people are just too old to work, you know what I mean? Like, or they become much less productive. In practice, right, in Canada, we have social security benefits, so like there is a limit beyond which people, like old people won't work. It's not great, I agree, like the state of retirement is bad, but there is sort of like a theoretical floor to that, at least in Canada, because of your social security. But yeah, again, this is a really tricky question, right? You can kind of convince yourself that any of these are correct, it's really just a do.
Fucking G-string, buddy.
Let's see, did I talk about, yeah, E, increasing productivity of labor, increasing productivity of land, and increasing productivity of the capital stock. Again, this one, like, land doesn't really get more productive, like, I mean, it's tough, right? Like you might ask yourself, like, couldn't capital and land get more productive over time? Like, yes, but that's not really what's happened, right? In practice, it's like people get more educated, people get better at their jobs. It's usually the labor force that drives productivity. Like in terms of farming, right? Like we've pretty much reached like there's families that have huge swathes of land that have been farming it for generations, right? Like they pretty much become as good at farming as you can get, for instance, right? Like that's something to consider. Increasing productivity of the capital stock. I mean, it's more about like what do we assume is driving the business model, right? That's not one of those things. It's really just labor productivity in general. Anyway, yeah, that one tricky. All right. Number 7. In national income accounting, a reduction of inventories counts as what? Anybody? C, negative investment, exactly. That's exactly how we say it, right? It's just sort of a definition, there's not really much more to say about it. Number 8, why are transfer payments excluded from the government component in the calculation of GDP? Does anybody have an idea? Yeah.
B.
D?
Yeah.
Why D?
Because transfer payments are kind of just done, like, not really with the idea of making any more money.
But what is the market value of a transfer payment? It's the dollar amount, right? It's actually very easy to assess the market value of a transfer payment, right? If I give you a GST rebate of $50,000, what's the market value of it, right? $50,000, it's right there. So it's not D, unfortunately, but it's a good guess. Yep. A, why A?
Because, well, the government's not actually like purchasing anything. It's just like extra income that's given to people to consume more.
Exactly, right? So it's a little tricky because this will generate income, right? But it just is not associated with the production of a good or service, right? So if we count it in government expenditure, then we'd be double counting it, right? Because the way it shows up in income is just directly through a transfer payment. The way it's gonna show up in expenditure is indirectly, people are gonna consume more, right? Like we're increasing their income, so that's gonna show up in the other categories of expenditure, right? So basically, if we were to add that to government services as well, we'd kind of be double counting that. But a good sort of like anchor point is you always remember, like we're only tracking things that are associated with the production of a good or service, right? So in this case, it's just money being moved around, which isn't increasing or decreasing GDP. Number 9. Suppose that in 2018, ABC Corp produced $6 million worth of natural gas pipes, but was able to sell only $5 million worth. Is the remaining $1 million of unsold pipes part of GDP for 2018? What do we think? Yep.
I said A.
Yes, since changes in inventories are part of consumption expenditures, but they aren't, right? Because what did we just say changes in inventories are part of? What is a decrease in inventory recorded as?
Negative investment.
As reduction in investment, right? So an increase in inventory, that's all being recorded under investment. So you're correct that it is yes, but the reasoning is incorrect on that.
Okay.
So B.
So the answer is B. Yeah, I guess I just gave it away. Yes, since they are part of the economy's output in 2018, right? Again, in practice, like, it's kind of tricky to value inventory, right? Like, you don't, like, There's some companies where it's like maybe they just made something and it's never been sold before, so you have to try to like guess at what its value is. In this case though, we're obviously in a simple scenario because it's just telling us, right? ABC Corporation produced $6 million worth of natural gas pipes is all the information you need. So that's what GDP is, right? That $5 million worth is gonna show up in consumption, right? That's gonna reduce inventories and increase the consumption account, and then the $1 million left over is still gonna show as a $1 million increase in investment expenditure, right? Does that make sense? So overall, it's just $6 million. All right. I gotta zoom out a tiny bit for this one. All right, so we've got all that. This one is probably one that wasn't very well succeeded, but I don't know. I haven't seen the grades yet. All right, so what is the value of GDP in billions of dollars? I'm just gonna walk through this one because it's kind of hard to just verbally explain. Okay. So I mean, this one's easy, right? Hopefully. And the answer is C, because we know that the expenditure definition is going to be C plus I plus G plus NX, right? And we're given all that directly. So consumption is 2808. And then investment is 537. Notice how we say gross investment there. Does anybody know what net investment is? What's net investment? What is it net of? What are we subtracting from investment? Depreciation. So that's just kind of a reminder, comprehension check. That's why it says gross investment, right? Because we're including depreciation. So $537 of gross investment. Government spending, 524. And then exports minus imports is 32 minus 35, right? So that's just going to be -30, which is equal to 3,800 plus 66. Any questions about number 10? All right. So the next one, I mean, it's a bit of a trick, right? It's definitely, I personally find it much harder to think about GDP in terms of income than expenditure. To me, expenditure makes a lot more sense. So 11 to me is a little more difficult. It's a bit of a trick though, right? Because like, what do we just calculated what GDP is, right? In practice, right, I think you guys have seen, I think there's tables in the G book of like an actual stats can like GDP table decomposition. They would have like a statistical discrepancy line in practice, because in practice, like sometimes like different people are measuring expenditure than are measuring income in Canada, and sometimes there's measurement error, right? So we add like a statistical discrepancy. But like we know that expenditure has to equal income, right? So you could just automatically put the same answer without doing any math. But if you wanted to do math, or if maybe you were too worried about, you weren't confident in doing that, which is fair, this is how you do it, right? So here's where it gets the trickiest part is that GST remittances, we treat them as wages, right? Specifically, because again, these things do generate income. So, and if you look in the G book, I'm pretty sure it says right there, like it's wages specifically including transfer payments in this case, right? So that's probably the place where most people got it wrong, yes.
What is a GST remittance?
GST remittance is like, I mean, I get like $400 every year on my tax return because you get charged sales tax. Does that make sense? So it's like you get charged like I don't remember what it is in BC, but like you get charged like 14% or whatever on whatever you buy, right? The government remits that to, like it basically splits it up and remits it to Canadians, right? As like a negative tax.
Like it gives it back to you?
Exactly.
We got one recently, didn't
Maybe, I don't know. I think we don't have to get into how it works in Canada, but the point is that's what GST remittances are. Yeah, so maybe that's definitely one specific to Canada. Like GST is a Canadian, it's general sales tax, which I don't think is just what we call it in Canada. So yeah, but the key is you had to add that to wages basically in your income. I think that's probably where most people went wrong. So the answer is, remember that income is separated into factor payments and non-factor payments, right? So what are factor payments? That's wages, rent, interest, and profits, right? So in wages, remember, again, this is the trick, it's 3029 plus 107, right? So our wages are gonna be 3029. Because you gotta think about it, right? Like that is going to be reported as income if you receive it from the government, right? Again, it doesn't correspond to production, but we have to report it on the income side. So 3029 plus 107. Rent in this case, what does rent refer to, right? Rent is not referring to like the rent you pay on your apartment, but like what does rent mean in this case? Or it's like rent and interest, right? Like these kind of are the same thing. Which account is gonna give us our rent and interest from this one? Anybody? It's gonna be interest and investment income, right? That's gonna be our, I think. That's what it is, yeah. So I think actually most of the time in economics, rent doesn't refer to the rent you pay in your apartment. I think specifically in the G book, rent actually does refer to literal rent, so that's my mistake. Normally rent is we refer to rent as like excess profits, like economic profits we call it, but yeah. In this case though, there isn't rent, we just have interest and investment income. So maybe you could think of it as R is 0 and then 276 is all an I, right? It doesn't matter. And then profits, right? Where does the profits right there, 423, right? Which should give you the same as before. Again, though, you could have just told yourself income has to equal expenditure, and then put the same answer, right? All right. Number 12. The table below shows the total output and prices for an economy that produces only two goods, potatoes and oil. Data is provided for the years 2008 and 2018. So what is the real GDP for 2008 if 2018 is the base year? So in this real GDP calculation, which quantities are we going to use? What year?
2008.
Which year's quantities are we going to use here?
2018.
We're going to use the quantities of 2008, right? So we've got 1,000 kilos of potatoes, right? And then I'm going to put the prices in a sec, and then we have 50 barrels of oil, right? And so what's the price of the potatoes we're going to use now? We're going to use the 2018 prices, right? It's kind of an unusual one. Normally, I feel like you probably have that reversed. But our base here is 2018, so we're going to take the prices from 2018. So potatoes are $6 a kilogram. So, okay. So potatoes are $6 a kilogram in 2018, and oil is $60 a barrel. Right, and so the answer is that real GDP is $9,000. So it's C. Any questions? I'll get on that. Okay. Consider the consumption function in a simple macro model with no taxes. At the level of national income, where the average propensity to consume is equal to 1, the nation's households are what? What's the answer here? Anybody?
A.
A. Why is it A?
Because it's a ratio, so APS is 0, they don't save anything.
Exactly, right? That's by definition, right? I mean, intuitively, like your average propensity to consume is 100%. That must mean you're consuming all of your income, right? But mathematically, right, we're saying that C divided by Y is equal to 1, right? And the only way that can occur is if C is equal to Y, right? That's why. But you hopefully didn't even need to do any math there. So that's number 13. Any questions? All right. We got a figure here. This one, probably the hardest in my opinion. You really have to think. So we're going to refer to this figure. And we're trying to graphically, basically, we have to graphically calculate what the marginal propensity to save is here. And this one's really tricky, at least to me. I don't like graphically calculating things, so to me this is like a really hard question. But you just have to think about conceptually, what is the marginal propensity to save, right? It's first of all, right, let's find our break-even point. What is our break-even point in this? Remember, do you remember what the break-even point is? What is it?
Equilibrium.
Sorry?
Equilibrium.
No, it's not the equilibrium. What's the break-even point for consumption?
Savings and consumption is
It's the point at which our savings are equal to zero, right? At which we're consuming all of our income. So what we're trying to find here is the marginal propensity to save, which is going to be equal to a change in savings is going to be delta S over delta Y, right? I guess YD in this case, because there's no taxes, so I might as well just write that. Right? This is the marginal propensity to save. But the problem is, right, like, before this point C, we have no idea. Like, we can't really compute it, because it's just going to be zero before the break-even point, right? Because we aren't saving until we reach that minimum level of income. So we have to sort of place ourselves to the right. So the first step is you have to find that break-even point. And then you have to be past that when you calculate your delta S and delta YD. That's kind of the only trick. Otherwise, you're just calculating the slope of a line, basically. No, I mean, yeah, I guess not really. You're calculating the slope of a line that's not actually there. So what's delta S in this case, right? How do we find what our savings are on this graph? What does the 45-degree line represent? Income? It does not represent income. Yep.
I think it would be your A function would go right along the 45-degree line if you spent everything that you earned. Like if the MPC was 1.
Yeah, exactly, right? That line is telling us the set of points where we're consuming as much as we make. That's the set of, every point on this line is a point where we're saving 0, right? And so basically our savings are going to be the difference between our consumption and that income line, right? So I guess it kind of does represent income in a way, right? Because it's telling us our income, we would be consuming all of our income if we were up here, but we're down here. So this difference must be our savings, right? It's kind of what we're thinking. So delta S in this case is going to be the line DE, right? Is that clear to everybody there? So that's our delta S. And then our delta disposable income in this case, right? Because we have, again, like if we can't put ourselves before the break-even point, that's not going to work because our savings are 0. So we have to be, our delta S has to be this, right? That
You
kind of
get so many
corresponds.
emails.
So our delta S is going to be, what was that? Yeah, Y2, Y3. So that's what the answer was. I think that's B.
Go.
The correct answer is B for that one. I think it's a tricky one. Are there any questions? All good?
I actually think I got that one.
Go.
We're almost done here.
Wasatch Academy Education.
Okay,
People
15.
actually pay $80,000 to go there.
So what is the correct equation for the consumption function?
Where is it?
Number
It's in
15.
Utah. It's in Mount Pleasant, Utah.
Sounds kind of hype, like.
It's not.
What do we
It's
need?
out like 2,000 people.
Our consumption function,
Yep.
we know it's gonna look like this, right? It's gonna be C equals A plus BYD. This graph already has YD on the axis there, so we don't need to do any more work. But
Somewhere along.
what do we need to find? What's A?
Did you go there?
From the graph?
Yeah.
500.
On scholarship?
Yeah. Dude, I get grand.
That's great.
What's B? How do we find
Are you
B?
kidding me? There's no fucking way I'd go there.
500 divided by 1,000, right?
Where is it?
That's basically it. It's like you take any 2 points and you calculate the slope, and all of them will give you 0.5.
Yeah. That's.
So B
that's
here is
down. It
0.5
barely shows up
YD.
on the map.
Are there any questions?
It is,
All good?
but
Alright.
it's also crazy.
I live there.
Number 16 times
I think I actually got that one too.
Consider a consumption function of the following form.
Yeah.
C equals 50 plus 0.6 YD. At what level of disposable income will desired savings be equal to 0? So what are desired savings in this case? How do we define them?
1 minus
Y minus,
No, it was 1 minus.
is it Y or is it YD? It's YD, right? I mean, in this case, again, I don't think there's any taxes, but it is important to keep track of. So, by definition, our desired savings is just our disposable income minus our desired consumption, right? By definition. And then we know what our consumption function is, so we can just substitute that, right? So we have savings is equal to YD minus 50 minus 0.6 YD, right? And then we can simplify this, and it just gives us 0.4 YD minus 50, right? So that's our desired savings function. And if we, what we're looking for is the point where savings are equal to 0. So if we set this equal to 0, right? That tells us that we have 0.4 YD equal to 50, which tells us that the level of disposable income we're looking for is going to be 50 divided by 0.4, which I think is 125. So that's D. Are there any questions about that? Yeah.
Wouldn't it be 83? Because that's the consumption function, but you're asked to find the savings.
So when savings are equal to 0, we could do two things, right? Maybe you could approach it
Oh.
by replacing C with YD.
Okay, yeah,
Or
yeah.
you could do the savings, right? So I mean, I think maybe that, for some of you, that might be more intuitive, think of it in terms of consumption. So you can think of it, you could define it as the point where C is equal to YD, or equivalently, I mean, that's what I did, right? I just set that equal to 0. So I kind of maybe did it in a roundabout way, but yeah. Any other questions? All right. Consider the simplest macro model with demand-determined output. If desired aggregate expenditure is greater than actual national
Good on
income,
you.
then what?
I didn't get that.
Oh.
Which one is it?
A.
A? Why A?
0.6 instead, so I got something else.
Oh, where?
Who said A? Let's see. Why A?
Because it is not correct.
It's not correct?
No, it is not correct.
D is not, well, let's go through them then. So, inventories will likely begin to fall, causing firms to increase production, right? Here, basically, our desired aggregate expenditure is greater than our national income. So basically, actually, hang on, 17. Yeah, okay. So inventories will likely begin to fall, causing firms to increase production. That's
I think
true,
it's E
right?
to A and-
That's when aggregate expenditure is higher than national income. That's kind of like another way of saying our demand is higher than our supply, right? So
D.
in this case, what do we assume happens?
That's a problem.
Is that firms have excess capacity, and that excess capacity starts to diminish, right? So they have, their inventory start to fall, and they're incentivized to increase their production. So A is correct, but you'll notice that there's one down here, so maybe we are looking for two correct answers here, right? So let's check B, just out of curiosity. Actual national income must be less than the equilibrium level. This is also true, right? Because aggregate expenditure is less than actual national income, right? And what's the equilibrium defined as? How do we define the equilibrium in the aggregate expenditure model? Anybody? Exactly, right? Not Y equals AE. So here it's saying AE is less than Y. And so we assume that Y adjusts to fill that gap, right? So A and B are correct here, and so the correct answer is E. Are there any questions? Consider a simple macro model with a constant price level and demand-determined output. If the marginal propensity to spend in such a model is 0.4, the simple multiplier is what? This one's easy, right? The multiplier is just 1 over 1 minus the marginal propensity to spend, which in this case is 0.4, right? So 1 over 0.6, which is, I don't even know what that is. 1.67. Is everybody clear on that? It's just the multiplier formula, right? So that one is C. Number 19, consider the government's budget balance. Suppose G equals 400 and the government's net tax revenue is 20% of national income Y. Government saving is negative for all values of Y, which are what? So let's define what government saving is, right? What's government saving? Anybody? How do we define government savings?
T minus G.
T minus G, right? So we're asking ourselves,
I said B.
at what point does T minus G equal
Like
0,
you.
right? So we're asking ourselves, when does T
I don't want to
equal
say,
G?
because it's probably wrong.
And so we've got some things we can expand. So we know that T here is going to be 20% of national income. So I can just write 0.2 Y instead of T, and they tell us what G is, right? So G is 400. And so we can just solve for Y here, which is 400 divided by 0.2, or I think that's 2,000, right? Yeah, 2,000.
Joe actually got it.
So the level of national income where government savings are 0 is $2,000. Is that clear for everybody? Alright. Number 20. Suppose real national income is equal to 800 and government purchases are equal to 200.
He was like,
If the government's net tax revenues are equal to T times Y, where T is the net tax rate, then what is the value of T necessary for the government to have a balanced budget? So what does it mean for the government to have a balanced budget? It's the same thing, right? Government savings are 0, T equals G. So we're asking ourselves, it's kind of the same thing, but we're solving for a different variable, right? So T equals G, and here we have an unknown tax rate is equal to, oh, actually we have income, don't we? Yeah, income is 800, so we have 800 T on this side, and then we're told that G is 200. And here, all we're doing is solving for T, which is 0.25.
Yeah, I got it wrong.
So it's gonna be B.
Oh.
Is everybody clear on that?
I thought they
Any
said B,
questions so
but.
far?
No.
I hope
I
everyone
said-
understands. Number 21.
Panicked.
Which of the following can cause a parallel upward shift in the net export function? This one's, this one might be tricky because I think now you guys have seen, prices and output in the short run, where I think we assume, we have some conflicting assumptions there, which we'll maybe talk about next week, but does anybody know what this one is yet?
Increase in foreign national income.
Increase in foreign national income. Exactly. That one we'll talk about, so let's maybe go through some of the incorrect ones, but B is the correct answer. So an increase in domestic national income, what do we assume that does to net exports, right?
Street butter. Street butter.
What does an increase in national income do to net exports? Does it affect exports or imports?
Affects exports.
How does it affect exports? What is our net export function, right? Our net export function is this. We assume this is just an exogenous constant, and we assume that imports are little m times y, almost like a kind of tax, right? So if we increase national income, it's going to increase our imports, but it's going to rotate that curve, right? We're changing, or it's not going to rotate, I guess it will shift up. No, that would shift down, my bad, yeah. So we're increasing y, and that's going to shift our net export function down, right? Because we're subtracting from net exports, and we're looking for an upward shift. So we're going to skip B. C, an increase in domestic prices relative to foreign prices, right? In this case, we assume that this would cause, what would happen here, right? It's going to cause a downward parallel shift, right? Why is that? Why is it going to cause a downward parallel shift? First of all, what would this do to our exports? Right? What are we looking at here? An increase in domestic prices relative to foreign prices. What does that mean? Are people going to want to buy more domestic goods or fewer domestic goods? Prices have gone up, so what are they going to do? They're going to buy less, right? It's saying domestic goods are more expensive relative to foreign goods. So that should reduce our exports, right? And then there's a second effect, right? Because remember, what is Y? Is it nominal income or real income? We've assumed up until this point, right, that the price level remains constant all throughout. So this is, we're talking about real income here. But when the price level changes, now our real income is changing, right? Because the real value of our dollars are changing. So that also is going to have a secondary effect. It basically is going to reduce our income, right? It's like a reduction in income, which is going to reduce our imports. And so that's going to cause a downward shift, right, which is not what we're looking for. D, a decrease in the Canadian dollar price of foreign currency. That's the same thing, right? Like, prices themselves aren't changing, but you have to, the price of exchanging your money into Canadian dollars is, so like, that's basically gonna have the same effect, right? We just assume though, I think that it's gonna shift. I mean, maybe we'll talk later about its effect on Y, but for now, I think we just assume that's a downward shift in X. But it's a downward shift nonetheless, and that's not what we're looking for. And then E is actually just, I think it's the same, maybe I'm crazy, but I think it's just the same thing as C, but in a different way, but I was kind of staring at that for a couple minutes and couldn't decide, so. I think they're the same thing. I don't know why he did that, but yeah. So it's the same logic for C, right? An increase in domestic prices relative to foreign prices is the same as a decrease in foreign prices relative to domestic prices. That's the same thing, so yeah. Number 22. Which of the following can cause a parallel upward shift in the net export function? Or which of the following can cause an upward shift and flattening of the net export function? Now this is like a weird one because like, to me, there's parts where we're assuming it's, I think the marginal propensity to import, we maybe assume is related to, what do I say here? 22, right? Basically, the answer is a decrease in domestic prices. Oh, sorry, wait. The answer is actually E, right? Both C and D are correct because C and D are actually kind of the same thing as we just talked about, right? But the thing is I need to ask Dr. Gavin about that one because, like, my understanding is up until now we're assuming that it's not clear to me how that actually causes a rotation of the curve, right? Because the only thing that can cause a rotation of the curve is if this changes. And we haven't really assumed, I don't think. I have to double check, but we actually later, like in the unit you guys are in now, we're assuming that this is just, we're assuming that this question doesn't even make sense. So yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna have to check with Dr. Gavin about that one. I think maybe somebody else caught it in the grading, but yeah. So I will stay tuned for that one. I might post something about it.
Still got that much.
The correct answer is E and C. It's C and D, but again, it's just like, to me, I don't
Yes,
think,
though.
to me that's a
Saw the
mistake,
two
because I don't think in our
answers
model
around, it's
it
like-
should cause a rotation, right?
Good
Because we're
on
not
you, right?
changing
Good
that,
on
we're
you, man.
basically changing our real income.
You
So
see
that, yeah.
both. Like,
I don't really know.
correct.
God.
If you're guessing.
But yeah, I have to check the G
If
book.
you're guessing.
So
Then
yeah,
it's
for now, don't worry, the correct answer, it's being graded as E, but I'll bring it up before your grades come out, so don't worry about it. Or I think it's already been up, but yeah.
Maybe.
In our simple macro model with government and foreign trade, the marginal propensity to consume out of disposable income is blank, whereas the marginal propensity to consume out of national income is blank. So what's the difference between disposable income and national income? One is before and one is after tax, right? So national income is before tax, disposable income is after tax, right? So the correct answer here is going to be A, right? Our marginal propensity to consume out of disposable income is going to be just whatever we set that at, right? Whatever that B term is. And then our marginal propensity to consume out of national income is going to be that times
No, I
one
did
minus the
with,
tax rate,
with
which
the
is the
minus
percentage of
M.
income
Afterwards, I did D.
we actually take home, right? So for every dollar of income, we keep 1 minus E% of it, and then we spend
I might have done that
the MPC times that
I did
amount, right?
D
So
or
that's
A.
why, that's the correct answer there. So for that one, it's A. And I think this is finally the last one. I don't think I have time to do anything after this, so I think this is gonna do it for today.
Holy shit.
All right. What is the value of the multiplier in this economy? This is kind of a tricky one because they give you a lot of information you don't need, right? In this case, what have we said? We've got a marginal propensity to consume, we've got a net tax rate, there's no foreign trade, fixed price level, billions of dollars. So what is our aggregate expenditure curve going to be? It's going to be this, right? It's going to be C plus I plus G, right? And we can decompose that as I've done before, so I'm going to kind of skip a lot of steps. It's going to get decomposed into autonomous consumption, right? Plus investment, plus government spending, plus B times 1 minus the tax rate. We kind of just, we just talked about this, right? So that, and Y. So we're looking for B times 1 minus T, that's Z, right? So then our multiplier is, again, just 1 over 1 minus Z. So here,
I'm telling you, it's 2.5.
Z is going to be equal to we assume that B
No, it's
is
2.5.
0.75.
Oh, yeah.
And the net tax rate is 20%, right? So that's gonna be times 0.8, which is 0.6. And so our multiplier is 1 over 1 minus 0.6, which is equal to 2.5. So the answer there is, gonna be D for that one. And that's all I got for
Put
today,
it in.
so.
Oh, shit. Oh, shit.
If you have any questions, you'll have to come to office hours or email me.
Come on, I stared at that equation before the test.